as women mull their election choices, we talk about the state of women in South Africa, particularly black women who find society to still be unyielding to them when it comes to poverty, unemployment and gender-based violence. What should those who want a changed reality for them be looking for when making their critical representation choices? We talk now to two experts in the field. Desiree Manamela is the Chief Director for Labour Statistics at StatsSA, and Omogolo Taunyane-Mnguni is a GBV activist. To the pair of you, thank you very much for making time for our program today. It's such an important topic. The status of South African women on paper seems to be moving in the right direction, I should say. Noteworthy representation and leadership and government decision-making structures. The laws protecting women's rights are there. There's significant civil society activism on gender-based violence, but sadly, the majority of the South African population living under the poverty line is black and female, and our women are more disadvantaged than men, less likely to have a tertiary education and faced reduced employment prospects. Desiree, I want to start off with you to share with our viewers a fuller statistical picture of South African women, black in particular. All right, we lost her. Omogolo, I'm not sure if you have a view just on the numbers, and we'll get Desiree back now for the numbers. The numbers are just the vessel of our understanding. Behind it, of course, is the humanity of and the stories of people who are living in these experiences, living in the danger, facing the reality of what it means to be a black and a woman in South Africa today. And I'd love for you then to just share that human picture with us, Omogolo.
Good morning to you, Iman, and your listeners. Thank you for having me. I think it was very helpful in what you shared in your opening statement that we have the legislation, we have the policies, and they are wonderful on paper. And they speak on women's empowerment, they speak about their rights, and it speaks about their position in society, which should prioritize them and afford certain protections and liberties. But when you look at the statistics, because we are of the firm belief that it is the statistics that tell us the reality on the ground, they paint a different picture. And that picture is about high vulnerability and risk to gender-based violence in the form of rape, in the form of sexual and human trafficking, in the form of drugs trafficking, in the form of murder and GBH assault. So there is an incongruency and a disconnection between all of this wonderful policy that protects women and the reality that is on the ground in terms of the lived experiences of women.
And we must talk about why that chasm continues to exist when you have a country with such massive levels of gender-based violence, high vulnerabilities of women and children populations, a government that says it's committed and as we talked about has that edifice of or that legal infrastructure that's meant to protect them, still experiencing what you're so starkly describing to us. Something is incredibly wrong there. I want to bring back Desiree into the conversation, and we wanted to kick off with the statistical idea as well. 40 to 50% of intimate partner violence affects women in South Africa. We still don't know the full dimension of the problem that we face because there aren't any reliable government databases. But what can you share with us from a statistical perspective, Desiree, on the face of suffering, poverty and victims of violence in South Africa?
Yes, thank you, Iman. I think, like it has been mentioned, we see a lot of women being vulnerable and being disengaged also from the labor market. And it's a couple of things. I mean, they become discouraged and they become inactive because of the other issues that are related to their household setups. I mean, for example, we see in terms of unemployment rate, we see unemployment rate of women consistently being higher than that of men. And when we look at by race, we also see unemployment rate of black women being consistently higher than all the other population group. And when you also look at what is happening also in the labor market, you find that women are unable to participate in the labor market, or they have a very low participation rate in the labor market, because I mean, some of them, for them to start being participants of the labor market, they have to be able to have other means of support in terms of looking for employment and also for finding employment. And it has also been mentioned, I think, since 2008, if you look at the trend, you see that unemployment rate of women is way higher than that of men, and men are able to participate in the labor market and are also easily.
Oh, Desiree, we keep losing your signal, unfortunately. Omogolo, I want to put that piece of what Desiree has just said to you. When we think about unemployment rates way higher for women, part of the story of gender-based violence in South Africa, and having had these conversations similar to the one I'm having with you now with activists that work in the field, is the financial dependency aspect of why in a lot of cases women stay in dysfunctional relationships, often bearing the brunt of that abuse because of that financial dependency. Is that still correct in South Africa today? How does the story of women's unemployment connect to the story of violence against women?
Interesting point that you're making, and a critical one as well, because we know that access to education, basic education, is closely correlated to the kind of employment prospects that women would have. So if, for instance, like you have just mentioned, you are an unemployed woman or you are a dependent of your partner, the chances of you firstly reporting intimate partner violence or any form of GBV to the police is highly unlikely, because the first consideration that will come to your mind is, what will my livelihood look like once I send the person who I depend on for a living to jail, right? So we need to start talking about the kind of support mechanisms in terms of the societal fabric that should be available. We need to talk about, why is it that women are not participating more meaningfully in the economy, to empower them so that in situations when they are at risk, they can then have more choices to say, I do not want to be in this situation, and therefore I am going to leave, and I will still be secure after that decision.
Desiree, what's so interesting is that the work that StatsSA does, and we know this, of course, over the years as well, it focuses on that the quantitative research. It's about putting the numbers together and building that profile. Is there any insight that you can offer us from a qualitative perspective that can begin to close some of these chasms that Omogolo is talking about, and the ones that you raised a little bit earlier on, in terms of this historical punishment, really, for women in an economy and society like ours?
Iman, I think we got cut off somewhere because I lost you completely. Maybe you might want to repeat what you just asked, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry, and I'm so sorry you're having such a torrid time with the comms this morning, because I really want you in this conversation, because you provide a lot of that sort of contextual background that is so important to what we see, in terms of the suffering in society. But I was basically asking you, just in terms of your observations from, I know that the StatsSA will focus on the quantitative aspects of how to measure South Africa and the kind of suffering that black women experience, but whether there's any insights you can share from an experiential perspective on why we still see the same historical prison, really, for women in South Africa, in the economy and in our society.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean, but from the statistics point of view, I'm able to provide you with a lot of data, and in terms of what we are seeing, we're seeing a lot of black women still suffering in terms of poverty, in terms of unemployment. They have been consistently, based on the data that we have, consistently being, if you look at specifically black Africans, they have been significantly poor across the years that we have sort of measured.
Desiree, we're just going to have to make a decision because we've lost your signal again. And again, I think what we should do is reload this conversation as well. We're out of time for the segment, but I want to be able to come back and complete this discussion with you, Omogolo, as well. There's just one more final thing I want to put to you, Omogolo, and it really disturbed me when I read it. So there was research that was cited in an article in The Conversation, and it did make for uncomfortable reading. The research is dated. It's about 8 years old or so. But it showed that South African men and women endorse what they termed ambivalent sexism. And what that means is where women feel positive about a role in which they serve men's needs, like the roles of a cherished wife or the preferred sexual partner. Men, on the other hand, are reportedly threatened by women's empowerment and the allocation of state resources to deal with some of these deficiencies that we see in the system. And I really would love your perspective on that, because you are talking to women, you are in communities. Does your experience corroborate this perspective?
Thank you for that. The experiences of women on the ground, just to support what you just mentioned now on the ambivalence, you will often find that because we live most probably in a patriarchal society, there is a gendered expectation of how women and men should perform their roles. Now, when you look at a society like South Africa, where women are rising and having more access to opportunities in terms of participating more in the labor market and being preferred candidates for BEE positions, it starts to create disconnect and a bit of a disruption in the system of patriarchy, where women and men now have to compete at a more equitable level. And that is not what a patriarchal society has been used to. So that's why you see that there is a lot of this discomfort that comes from men in terms of the changing and evolving position of women in society. And this does call for another conversation at some point about how can we start transforming society more positively to include both men and women when you're talking about gender equality and solutions to GDP.
Big topics, and thank you to both of you for being with us today. And apologies, of course, for some of the technical issues there. But Desiree Manamela, Chief Director, Labour Statistics at StatsSA, and Omogolo Taunyane-Mnguni, who is a renowned GBB activist here in the country.